Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to the talk. I can see a lot of familiar faces, so really appreciate you being here today. So I'm Fadel Radib. I'm based in between Berlin and Cairo, and it's very hard to define what I do. I do so many different things, but I would say one of my main roles is working as a community manager at a network organization that's called the Global Innovation Gathering. And I'm also a Pilates instructor. I teach Pilates. I am very much into movement. So basically, I work a lot with communities and people, with body. This is my interest in life. And I have with me my friend, Jeff Emmett.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff. I've been doing a lot of work with a bunch of groups in the Web3 space. Web3 meaning sort of blockchain technologies or beyond the existing Web2 paradigm, where we see all this corporate capture of digital infrastructure, and how can we increase sort of community ownership, stakeholders beyond just those providing capital, and building new communities of purpose with new tools and technologies for how to decide what's important, how to decide how we act collectively as groups, and coming together in communities of purpose to solve specific problems, which definitely ties right into our topic today.
Yes, amazing. So as you can see, we're doing a lot with communities and the concept of communities. So what is community resilience? So in my opinion, and I mean also as defined in many contexts, it is the ability of a group of people to go through adverse situations and adapt to it and respond to it in real time together. So basically, this is what I'm today here to talk about. How do we behave as groups of people in different places in face of special circumstances? These circumstances could be wars, very extreme example to start with. It could be, climate change incidents like earthquakes, famines, so many things that we have been facing actually in the recent years. So this is what drove me to want to talk about this today with my friend Jeff here, is because of how normalized all these incidents have become around us, and wanting to examine communities and the way they respond to these things, not just in our from the perspective of an individual and how we see and feel these circumstances, but as a collective, how do we react to that?
And why are we talking about this today? I think we have a series of exponential crises that are all feeding into each other. So the nature of our responses needs to be emergent. There's no way that we can top-down plan for all of the potential crises that are coming our way, with climate crises on top of ecological crises, on top of economic crises, on top of climate migration crises. The possible space of the problem set is so huge. We really need to empower local first response, emergent response, and empowering communities to do that, because we're also seeing at the same time this sort of crisis in our existing institutional forms. They're too slow, they're too, I'll say, bureaucratic for absence of a better word, but ultimately we're seeing simultaneously a lot of challenges in the physical world, and also the kind of failure or breaking point of these existing colonial institutions or bureaucratic institutions in addressing those crises. So I mean, we all see the news. These crises that are happening all the time. We've got floods in Bangladesh displacing millions. We have droughts in different parts of the world caused by often what happened in the first world before that causes challenges in the global majority. So how do we empower those people to address the challenges that are facing them without waiting for support from anywhere else in a top-down fashion? And of course, one that's very close and personal. The Palestinian genocide. What's going on at the moment in Palestine, with millions displaced, hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians murdered. There's all sorts of need for community resilience in so many different areas. And Fadia has been very prominent in one of these organizations in particular, which we'll talk a bit more about now.
So, and this is exactly also how we transform what we're talking about into more of a practical case study. So basically, as Jeff was saying, I am one, and probably one of so many of you who've been just watching the news, watching everything that's happening around the world and feeling helpless, right? Just the news became something that you're scrolling up and down and just seeing the suffering of some people and just not knowing what you can do exactly. A year and a half ago, I had that crisis, a self-crisis, I would say, because I felt, not just because I'm an Egyptian and connected to Cairo and living in Cairo at the moment, and felt so helpless, with everything that's happening right on the borders, but also because of the lack of international measures and humanitarian organizations that were supposed to be helping for these cases. So what I did was reach out to a person that I saw on Instagram called Noor Nassar. Noor is a young girl who is in Gaza and came up with an initiative called School Without Borders with her friend Abdullah. Maybe he's not here. And basically, she's a lawyer and Abdullah is an engineer. And amidst everything, they decided they need to do something. So basically, they started the School Without Borders initiative, which is basically an initiative of starting mobile classrooms in camps so that kids can still learn and not lose their most basic educational skills. Like they noticed that kids were no longer able to count numbers or say the alphabet. And they just felt like, okay, we need to do something about this. What are we going to do? We're going to start classrooms in tents. And though they're not teachers, they responded to the need of their community by starting that initiative. And this was the most enlightening moment. I felt like, okay, I'm just going to shoot her a message. What can I do? And she was very responsive and said, yes, I need help. Can we talk? So I got on a Zoom call with her. And that was another aha moment for me, because you're just watching the news and you feel very distant and you realize, actually, you can talk to people in these circumstances. There is still, thankfully, the internet connection. So we went into a Zoom call and then learned more about her needs. I introduced myself and what I do, and then was told that what she was trying to do was basically transform a group of young people who know nothing about education and teaching into teachers that can help her teach the kids. And I was like, that sounds familiar. Well, I'm a community manager of great people. Like I'm connected to so many teachers around the world and people who know how to do all kinds of stuff in, special circumstances and very resilient. We can connect you with people that can teach you and teach your your friends or people who are trying to be teachers in these circumstances. And this is exactly what we did. We brought in teachers. Rosanna is actually one of them. I don't know if she's here or not, from the Philippines, who's been working as a STEM educator. And then she said, I'm happy to educate and train some of the people and some of the teachers in Gaza. They found a tent, miraculously an internet connection that was very, very costly, but it happened. And I think you can see that here. That was our setting. So basically, this is a tent, actually, with a screen that they rented. And there would be a bunch of teachers. They were just sitting and listening to Rosanna as we do live translation from English to Arabic and telling them how to respond, how to become teachers, how to teach the kids. So I don't want to get too much into details, but this experience kind of lit a bulb in my head. Just this transformation from thinking, what can I do? There is nothing I can do in these circumstances, to feeling empowered, to having the agency to change something, even if it's just very small and more like a drop in a big sea of so many horrible things and suffering.
So I think this brings sort of this question to global communities like this one, is what can we do as a global community to help local communities that have specific problems? That might be mutual aid in the case of natural disaster. It may be as Fadia said, instead of watching these crises on our phone feeling helpless, how can we participate in international fundraising efforts? How can we raise awareness, apply pressure for the appropriate humanitarian response? A lot of the time, those of us in Western nations have a lot more power than we are led to believe, particularly in influencing our governments and our institutions in stepping up and providing appropriate response. contributing training. As Fadia said, it's really hard to get anything into or out of Gaza, but Zoom calls, no problem. Teacher training, no problem. Information is light. So we can use this kind of idea to spread training, ideas, protocols, open source solutions, things that can be globally shared and locally produced. There's a lot of power in that. So thinking as we are in this global community with maker spaces, with very intelligent people, how can we spread that abundance and mutual aid to the people who need it? Creating these kinds of solidarity networks, amplifying unheard voices, translating, documenting. There's so much we can do. So I think it's important that we don't kind of sink into despair, because I think this is part of the existing system strategy, not that it's any particular person trying to disempower us, but the status quo wants to stay the status quo, and that involves removing our agency to act. So remembering that we do have global solutions that we can apply in local context, I think is really important. So ultimately, we think there's a moral imperative for collective harm reduction. And where can we go with this? I think there's so much that we have not explored yet in terms of thinking of new protocols of care, a protocol being, a pattern of action. We can have a protocol, for example, exiting this building safely in case of a fire. The protocol is written in a bunch of places all around the building. So let's just give a quick understanding of what protocols are. There are new protocols in the digital realm as well. Things like Bitcoin or Ethereum are protocols, and maybe some people have heard good things or bad things. I think it's both. But there's also a new kernel of technology in some of these protocols that we can now use for very interesting things. So, for example, designing solidarity economies. Maybe our fundraising efforts, and maybe Fadia can talk about some of the difficulty of getting funding to Gazan education, the number of agencies that just would not allow funds to go through for any reason, getting kicked off of GoFundMe or Kickstarter, or I'm not saying specifically in this case, but it happens all the time. The status quo control of these funding mechanisms, and this doesn't have to be the way it stays. It is this way today, but we can now think new tools, new technologies. How can we use these to address the problems, or how can we, not send money to fix something, just have this sort of bottom-up support that can be drawn from the local to address those problems. So we're not coming in with prescription saying this is how you solve the problem. It's saying here is a global suite of solutions, and here is perhaps even an economy or funds that can be used by the people in that locality to address their own problems.
Yes, amazing. And I mean, from here, it drives me back to the moment of what can we do? So now, having been supporting Noor and Abdullah in Gaza real time as much as possible with a very, very bad internet connection, but still an existing one, right? Like, nonetheless, it's there. And being a year and a half through that process, what we were able to establish so far was a global community or a global support group from all around the world, from Philippines, from UK, from Egypt, from so many places that are just chipping in. They're like, we want to do something. And guess what? We did some things. Maybe it's relative. Maybe it's not so big, given the circumstances, but still we were able to shift things and move things. If nothing, it was even the moral support, feeling, that you're not, as a community, you're not alone. We are with you, because it can be very hard when you're living these circumstances and thinking that, the world is going by and everything is happening. So even if it's like the slightest idea of a moral support, what is the value that we can bring into that? So I'm saying this because also that same experience made me think, had I been prepared for something like this, what would I have done as a person who has more stable circumstances, have resources, have a network of amazing people around me? We had to start from the ground up, right? We would talk to them, we'd be like, what do you need? And then I go out, posting somewhere, asking people, can you do this, can you do that? And this took a lot of time. And there was a lot of, we want to help, but we can't. And there was a lot of trials and errors and failures. And this is what led me to think, how could we, as a community, prepare for that day? Because this is not just happening in Gaza. I mean, I'd hope that this would not happen anywhere. This is happening everywhere in the world in different shapes. So how could we be smart enough to use the resources that we have and prepare us and other people and other communities that are living like that. And in this way, it kind of, to me, this is really what, how the idea of a global community manifests. If we feel like we're all part of one, which is something that we have felt in the past years with the COVID, with everything that's been happening in the world, with the economic circumstances, we know now that we're more connected than we think we are. This is the status quo of the world. But what does it really mean to be connected? So one thing, for example, just to bring it back again from this massive idea to something small, what we are developing at the moment is a toolkit, is an offline toolkit that would help Noor, Abdullah, and other initiatives in different parts of the world to go ahead and quickly respond to the lack of education, something as basic as education, and teach teachers how to teach, or teach people how to become teachers in these circumstances, how to build classrooms, how to build curriculums. And education is just one element of that, right? If we think about food production, how much can be done there? If we think about renewable energy, communication, mesh network, again, another highlight that I thought about was like, a simple thing like an internet connection can be life-saver at some point, yeah? At least if it's not saving lives, it's bettering circumstances that are really harsh. So how could we use that simple thing as communication? How could we build maybe access points? We have Jasper with us here telling us earlier about building local access points in remote areas so that we could allow for communication to happen between these people or between the communities that are going through these distressful times. All of these are things that we can start working on now if we feel that they're important and if we feel that there is a need. And what I really want to say today is that there is a need. Unfortunately, it is the case. I mean, the world is, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of so many people, is going through a very transitional phase, a very distressful time, and we're going to see more and more of that happening. So why wait until we're in it? Why not start now?
Yeah, definitely. And quick shout out to Michelle Bowens for this concept of cosmolocalism. Where what is light is global and what is heavy is local. So we're not, producing things halfway around the world and shipping them. The things that are light, like ideas, like IP, like protocols, like training, anything that can go over a wire, for example, can be shared globally very easily. But things like, shoes or clothes or food, we should be producing as close to its consumption as possible so we can reduce our sort of reliance on these larger transport networks, which will also probably start to fail. And just a quick shout out on some of these, I think there are some really interesting opportunities for protocolization and incentivization. For example, like community mesh networks. Imagine if you melt down your internet service provider and instead of them getting all the profit, you actually split that among all of the people that are basically giving sort of Airbnb for your hard drive. You have a bit of bandwidth that you're not using. Cool, someone driving by on the road can use that bit of bandwidth and pay you for it. So rather than these, I don't know how it is here in Canada, we have huge telecoms monopolies. They're some of the richest corporations in Canada. They buy sports teams and stadiums, and why do they have all this money? Because they have critical technology infrastructure that should really be public goods infrastructure. All of these should be public goods infrastructure, and I think we now have new tools where we can think about new ways of collective ownership, collective provision, and sharing in not just the profits, but also how these systems run, so that we're making sure that they're fair to all the stakeholders that are involved. So, as Fadia said, thinking about how we can prepare for the future. Communities need to be anticipating these challenges and preparing for them ahead of time. There was a great talk the other day about community data centers. You don't want to deal with the problem after it's happened because all of a sudden you don't have this, whatever it is you need, a communications network. When that goes down, it's too late. We need to prepare in advance for when it goes down and make sure that it doesn't go down. In the present, when these crises are unfolding, we need to figure out how to adapt and respond in real time in adequate ways. And then, of course, as we go through these crises, we need to learn and improve by looking at what happened last time, improving our protocols, iterating training, making sure that when these things happen, we're prepared, and continuing to anticipate future crises so that we can be more forward-looking and hopefully more resilient as communities of purpose in the future. And I think we were going to leave a bit of time for discussion and Q&A. If anybody had any points, any counterpoints, please feel free. We've got a mic that will go around, and happy to take a few minutes of questions.
Yes, are there any questions, comments in the audience?
First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. I found it very inspiring. I really appreciated also the thought, like, building community when you're already in a crisis is really hard. But so I appreciate the thought that we should start doing that now. But also, like, in the neoliberal society that we are part of, where we are so indoctrinated to only think of yourself as an individual and not to think collectively, like, how can you get that snowball rolling to get people to be part of a community?
Great question. And it's so culturally contextual. So I live in the suburbs in Canada. I don't trade with my neighbors. I don't actually even know what most of them do. So going around and trying to say, like, hey, let's enter into economic exchange might be a little weird. Compared to, let's say, rural Kenya, where a friend of mine, Will Ruddick, is working on a group called Grassroots Economics. And basically what he's doing is unearthing these indigenous collectivization practices and renewing them with new technological tools. So things like Mweria or Chamas, they have basically savings and lendings groups where a bunch of families will come together, or the matriarch of each family will come together. And each week they, traditionally would lend one woman the money, and then she would go and do something for her family, whether it's, build a house or, some revenue production perhaps. And then each week or each month, the savings would go around the group. I think we can not just leverage those indigenous practices, but improve on them also with new, economic tools. For example, in these chamas, it required, lending money. What if there is no money? Actually, in these communities, there's farmers who need workers and there's workers who want work, but there's no cash to facilitate the transaction. So what they do is actually something called commitment pooling, where what you offer to the pool is not money, it's your commitment of whatever it is you do. Maybe you make shoes, you drive a taxi, you grow tomatoes, and everyone puts in a commitment, and then the lowest commitment, so if someone could only put in, let's say, $100 worth of commitments, then everyone can take out $100 of their own dollars or currency, and that currency is now good for anything in the pool. So what you're doing is kind of asynchronizing your needs and your supply and demand. What do we have in supply? Someone can give massages, someone can give taxi rides, someone can bake cakes. Cool, now we can all put those things into the middle. We withdraw our own currency against that, and then we use it to transact among a community. Of course, I think it changes quite a bit in context, when we have indigenous practices that have been used for a long time versus settler colonial states like Canada, where the isolationism was kind of built in. And I think there's some kind of a karmic struggle that I think maybe perhaps the developed world will have to deal with, because the pace of our development was, that we had fossil fuels, we built homes very far from each other, there was not the same sort of development. But I do think these indigenous practices are there for us if we are quiet and humble, and this is actually how nature works as well. A lot of the time there's mutualism, there's collectivism, there's solidarity between life forms. And I think we can remember that we are all indigenous to planet Earth, regardless of how society has kind of tried to tear us apart, or capitalism has tried to isolate, because that's better for the profit margins for everyone to have their own house, their own lawnmower, their own car. Sharing these things, that's bad for the bottom line. So I think we can go back to these sort of more traditional indigenous practices, but we need to be conscious and present about it.
And just to add something there, I think also, as we were saying today in the presentation, I think our systems and how we are, whether here in Europe or everywhere, because we became more of a global system, they're making us lean more towards this passive way of perceiving our power. And imagine if I hadn't sent the message, which I actually sent that message to Noor thinking, what am I going to get? Nothing, zero. What am I going to change? Nothing, zero. But there's like a tiny bit of a drive there that said, like, what do I have to lose? I'm going to just send out the message. And a year and a half later, maybe we didn't change again, but we did change something in the lives of people that I didn't even physically meet. And I feel like this, to me, is really this paradigm shift, this shift in mentality, that instead of saying, we're so individualistic, just taking a step and trying something different, taking the initiative, believing that you do have the power in general, but also specifically in these circumstances to make a change.
Thank you for the talk. It was really good. And I was thinking about there is already existing networks of care, and they are spread in several places in the global south where I come from. We have, hacker spaces and mushroom collectives and solidarity networks of savings, but they are not articulated in a bigger way. So how we can extend the connections of the networks of care?
Well, this is a very good question that I like to believe is what I'm working on. I think, so basically what happened, I'm going to bring it back again to this example because I'm using this today as an example, is reaching out to people. So I feel like networks build over trust and shared values. So by putting your work out there and being open enough to allow others to come in and contribute is a way of building a network in the first place. So there are spaces, I agree, makerspaces are a great example for that. They're community-based spaces. For those who don't know, they're workshop-like. They allow people to come, community members to come and interact and build and find solutions for their community. So capitalizing on this. And by the way, the group that is helping support Noor and Abdullah is actually, one of them is a makerspace in Cairo. So the director of the makerspace in Cairo was one of the people that started this with me because they believe in that. I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe Jeff, do you have something you want to say on this?
Yeah, I think actually this is a perfect example, and I think pooling, like meta pools. You said meta tools earlier, tools that describe themselves. I think, a lot of these practices involve collectivizing through pooling, and we can pool pools as well, and pools of pools of pools. So I think there's some really interesting sort of like path routing opportunities, not just for capital, but for information, for governance even. We can use new tools for sort of more granular stakeholder participation, and different groups could recognize the same, or they could recognize different tokens perhaps as having weight in their system for changing how things might work or suggesting new ways of doing things. So yeah, I think there's a lot of power in the mesh of these networks. It's not just one node, it's the mesh of nodes that really becomes powerful and challenges the current system.
We have 1 more minute.
Hey, can you hear? Okay. So it was lovely presentation and really nice. And I think coming from the global south, we also keep seeing a lot of the communities are already in crisis, or they're already massively impacted. And earlier, I used to see like a lot of the relief materials would go in, and they would play the Western world would often play the hero, while the community efforts would be not acknowledged or not even there. So now, when I just wanted to understand if you have any advice to can the global community play a role in creating a social norm of these community initiatives? So many more initiatives like Abdullah can spring up there, and can we create a narrative or shift the norms around these kind of community initiatives?
Yeah, thank you so much. So what is very special about Abdullah and Noor is that they're a grassroots initiative that responded to a need, right? So they were not even teachers. They didn't have to do anything with education. And they came in as some of these, there are always in each community, there are people that are more prone to take action and do something and are very driven. And Noor, especially Noor, is one of these people I'm going to share maybe later on, who wants to see her on Instagram. She's one of those very inspiring spirits, And basically, I think what we need to do is create more resources in terms of educational toolkits, for example, that would allow them to learn how to assume these roles within a community. And I think we're often not speaking about this enough. It's always that we're so used to this top-down approach of education, or getting our food served to us, or going to a hospital. So I think it's like really going back again to the most basic way of surviving on the planet and learning the skills and the tools that we need to survive, and not rely on the current modern state systems because they're volatile. This is what I can tell you. I come from Egypt, Cairo. It's also a very precarious, amazing place. That is the kind of resilience that I build as an individual, having to deal with so many unknowns, right? And I feel like in Europe it's less of that. And some people are laughing because they've been to Cairo and know what that is. But I think going back again to these very basic skills and tools and feeling of resilience, where you're not just standing there, freaking out and panicking in front of what is happening, but thinking in first holding your groundness, being grounded in the face of whatever is happening, and then starting to mobilize and connect with your community and work with your resources. And I'm learning this through my work as well, because I'm connected to a lot of grassroots initiatives that are doing similar work like Abdullah and Noor, but in less extreme circumstances. And this is what we've learned. There are so many toolkits, so many open source educational toolkits out there, so many systems, ways of thinking, people that can really give you different ways of thinking and seeing the world, but also behaving and interacting in an ecosystem. And I think this kind of skills is what we're lacking. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. So we are done with our time. One applause for our speakers, please.